earlier today. We are here to provide an update to the public on the work that we are doing together to address the public safety concerns.
Questions tonight about the conduct of at least one Toronto police officer, his activities on more than one occasion, and why he is still employed.
And by extension to black people in this region. So no more second chances for Mark Saunders, no more second chances for John Tory and this board.
Specifically, one officer who was cleared in the shooting deaths of 2 black men in the 90s and is now the head of the force's professional standards.
The Toronto Police Service, or TPS, has always been shrouded in corruption and mysterious arrest cases. It's not a secret that there's been a disproportionate amount of arrest and use of force in arrest when it comes to people of color, especially the black community. Sometimes the most corrupt cops get fired or arrested, but some of them get major promotions or run for mayor. This brings us to Rick Shank. Superintendent Rick Shank is currently head of the Toronto Police Professional Standards Unit, but his history has been less than professional. Today on Real Toronto Stories, we're going to go through the career of Superintendent Rick Shank. Make sure to like and subscribe and let us know in the comments below what you think of this content right here, and let us know who you want to see next on Real Toronto Stories. Let's get into it. The Professional Standards Unit is responsible for promoting and supporting professionalism within the organization and its members in order to strengthen the public confidence and cooperation within the Toronto community. Promoting and supporting professionalism within its organization and its members. Got it. Check. Now, through my research, it's been extremely hard to find the backstory of this individual prior to him joining the Toronto Police Force. All we know is that he's a man in his late 40s, he lives outside of Toronto, but I was not able to find his place of birth. Rick Shank joined the Toronto Police Force in 1990, and at some point of his life, in one of his marriages, he got married to a black woman. Now in 2023, he's in charge of promoting confidence between the Toronto Police Services and the community. The reason this is ironic is because his career in the TPS has only been checkered with questionable decisions and SIU investigations. A lot of these heinous accusations started from the beginning of his career with the force with his also notorious frequent partner, Glenn Aslan. Aslan's name will come up at various times in this story as we go through some of the disgusting incidents that Shank has been accused of and rarely reprimanded for. Both of these individuals worked at the 23 Division as well as a multitude of other divisions in the city of Toronto. The division covers south from Eglinton West and Scarlett Road area all the way up to Rexdale area ending at Steeles Avenue. Rexdale is a notorious area for low income and high crime with a multitude of shootings that happen between rival gangs within the neighborhood and outside of the hood. The area is very isolated due to lack of Toronto Transit Commission support, aka the TTC. This makes it somewhat a concrete island unto itself and a recipe for a lot of hood problems. It appeared that Shank has been involved in several incidents as a police officer, some of which have resulted in the death of young black men. In the first incident, Shank shot and killed Clifford Coley after a chase, claiming Coley pointed a gun at him. In the second incident, Shank and Aslan stopped a young black man who was walking to a parked car without any reasonable basis, and the suspect was later acquitted of a charge of assaulting a police officer. In the third incident, Shank was involved in a takedown of a drug dealer named Hugh Dawson, who was shot 9 times and killed by Shank's revolver. The police claimed Dawson tried to drive away and lunged for Shank's gun, but the SIU charged Shank with manslaughter. Shank had 2 trials, with the first resulting in a hung jury and the second resulting in his acquittal. In the first incident, an article from BuzzFeed explains, while investigating guns in the city's entertainment district, In the first incident, an article from BuzzFeed explains, while investigating guns in the city's entertainment district, Shank was told to do an information stop of a car. One of the passengers, Clifford Coley, a 20-year-old black man, bolted from the vehicle and Shank gave chase. Shank then shot and killed Coley in a backyard, claiming that Coley pointed a gun at him. Apparently, a semi-automatic handgun and ammunition from Coley's pocket were found. An investigation by SIU cleared Shank of any wrongdoing. The second incident, things got even worse. According to the BuzzFeed article, the same year, Shank and Aslan stopped a young black man who was walking to a parked car. A judge acquitted the suspect of a charge of assaulting an officer, noting that Shank and Aslan did not have any reasonable basis upon which to stop and demand identification from a citizen of fatally walking to a parked vehicle. The officers are simply acting intuitively on a hunch, as in their view, the area is a drug-infested area and the vehicle might be stolen. Then there's the arrest of the 31-year-old alleged drug dealer Hugh Dawson in a takedown in Scarborough, a borough in Toronto's East End. Dawson, a black man, was pulled over at a stoplight in his Honda Accord, boxed in by undercover cars. Dawson was alone and unarmed, although the officers said that they were told he had a gun. Officers rushed the vehicle with their weapons drawn, and Dawson was shot 9 times and killed. According to the evidence heard at the trial, most of the bullets came from Shank's revolver. Police claim Dawson tried to drive away, and when the officer tried to grab him, he lunged for Shank's gun. The SIU, however, did not buy it and charged Shank with manslaughter. He went on trial in 1999, and Aslan testified in support of him. The Crown said there was no evidence that Dawson had grabbed for Shank's gun or struggled, and suggested that Shank's fellow officers were lying about their version of the events. Shank had 2 trials. The first led to a hung jury, and the second he was acquitted. TPS spokesman Mark Pugash said, "In the first of the 2 shootings, the SIU investigated and they cleared Shank, and the second case, he was charged and he was found not guilty. Unless the verdicts are challenged, legally they are presumed to stand." This brings us to Ian Clifford Coley. Coley was a convicted gun runner that was shot and killed by Shank in 1993. On April 14, 1993, Coley and Mark Anthony Goodhall were driving in the Scarborough neighborhood. They parked at the now-defunct nightclub Hilly's parking lot. Goodhall was under a month-long investigation and had already accumulated over 41 firearm charges. Coley and Goodhall had been going from club to club in Scarborough, unbeknown of the investigation on Goodhall, as well as the surveillance on the clubs that had recently experienced shootings. The 2 emerged from the club and jumped in Goodhall's vehicle before they were swarmed by unmarked police cars. Coley bolted from the vehicle and Shank gave chase. Shank then shot and killed Coley in the backyard, claiming that Coley pointed a gun at him. Apparently, a semi-automatic handgun and ammunition from Coley's pocket were found, and an investigation by the SIU cleared Shank of any wrongdoing. Also in 1993, Shank and other officers were accused in a lawsuit of beating a young black man in December of that year. A video obtained by CTV News shows 29-year-old Paul Reese being hauled unconscious from a police vehicle. His head then hits the side of the police car. Once in the station, he's told by officers, "You're under arrest for assault with intent to resist arrest." Which then Reese replied, "I never assaulted nobody." In the 90s and early 2000s, Shank worked closely with the Black Organized Crime Squad, according to CTV News articles. An article states, questions were raised at the coroner's inquest about Shank working alongside what was then known as the Black Organized Crime Squad. It seems this unit gives extra policing in the black community over and above all normal policing. Coley's family lawyer, Peter Rosenthal, told CTV News at the time. Among the coroner's jury recommendations were to disband the squad and stop using the phrase non-white in police communications. Now, as well as terminating black men's lives, this lovely individual was involved in numerous cases of drug planting on men of color in quote-unquote drug-infested neighborhoods. The first incident was back in 2001 with a man named Kevin Kahn. Kahn worked for Home Life Realty, and he volunteered with the Toronto District School Board and Breaking the Cycle, a project that helps youth leave gang life. He was pulled over in the Eglinton Avenue and Allen Expressway area and accused of having quantities of cocaine in his car. Police found cocaine in the Mercedes-Benz Kahn was driving, but Kahn testified that he had just picked up the car from his brother who had it for the weekend and didn't know about the drugs as he drove to show a condominium to a prospective buyer. The charges were later thrown out, and the officer's behavior was called reprehensible by the judge presiding over the case. This was the first Canadian case under the term Kahn's lawyer called driving while black, or DWB. Funny not funny side though, years later in 2006, Kahn was actually convicted for cocaine trafficking and had street debts totaling up to $35,000. Whoa. Getting back to Rick Shank's partner Glenn Aslan, Aslan was accused of racial profiling again in a 2007 lawsuit launched by Afzal Badin, who said he was severely beaten by Aslan and 2 other officers. The year before, on his way to prayer at the mosque, Badin said that he got into an argument with Aslan and 2 undercover officers who didn't identify themselves as police. Badin was trying to get into an elevator when the 3 officers barred his entrance. The officers broke into Badin's apartment with guns drawn, terrorizing his family and assaulting Badin, according to Badin's lawsuit. The case was settled out of court, says Badin's lawyer. Then, in 2008, Shank and Aslan were involved in a major police investigation into a meth operation. One of the investigation's targets was a cocaine dealer, Vel Shamnani, who was placed under surveillance. Shamnani's lawyer, Leora Shames, said that after watching her client for a couple of years and not catching him in any illegal acts, the police were growing frustrated. So, the police tried faking a carjacking to see if he had any drugs on him. The police searched his home and his family members' homes and never found anything, she said. Then, in May of 2008, Shamnani left his car in a downtown Toronto parking lot overnight. The next morning, he found his car windows were smashed in. A week later, Shamnani was arrested and charged with having 7 kilos of methamphetamines with a street value of almost $1 million in his car in the night that he had left it in the lot. The police said it executed a search warrant, smashed the car windows, and found meth in the back seat before leaving the scene. It's not clear why the officers didn't wait for Shamnani to return to his vehicle to arrest him. In 2013, Shamnani went to trial where he denied he left any meth in his car. There, it was revealed that 8 days prior to the police claiming they'd found drugs in the car, Shank had pulled over a van driven by 2 men. Working alone, Shank said he seized 52 kilos of methamphetamine from the van, but then after removing the meth, left the 2 men to go without detaining them. What? During the trial, Shemes played wiretaps of Shamnani, arguing that if he had just lost $1 million worth of meth on the night that his car was broken into, there would be some sort of reaction. Sure enough, there was no reaction, she said. Not one phone call about the loss of close to $1 million worth of drugs. It makes absolutely no sense. As a result, Shemes argued that Shank, Aslan, and other officers concocted a story about finding drugs in Shamnani's car and had planted evidence. I've never been that convinced about anything in my life, she said. However, the judge chose to believe the police's story that they found meth in Shamnani's vehicle and dismissed Shemes' arguments that it had been planted. The judge felt that the idea of the officers planting evidence was an unlikely scenario. He sentenced Shamnani to 8 years in prison. Shamnani's lawyer stated, "I was devastated by this," Shemes said. "Not because I didn't win, but because you know what's really going on and you can't exactly prove it." Now, before I get into the present day, I want to go through a list of the pay rates and raises that Shank received while growing in the ranks of the Toronto Police Force. Now, from my findings here, it says that the average detective starts at a salary of around $110,000 per year. Now, before y'all jump out the window like, what the fuck? Remember, this is a dangerous job at the end of the day. Now, as far as Shanks, he's received numerous raises and promotions over the years. Here's a list of what police usually get paid for the different positions that they are in. Now, a court officer's average salary is about $104,942 per year. Average rate's about 4.9%. Inspectors have an average salary of around $171,661 a year. A detective sergeant gets about $158,000 a year, where a communications operator gets about $113,000 a year. A staff sergeant gets about $161,000 a year. A training constable gets $138,000 a year or around that. A detective gets $149,000 a year. The average sergeant gets about $154,000 a year. And plainclothes police constables get about $138,000 a year, with police constables getting about $128,000 a year. And this is the chart from OntarioSunshineList.com for most common positions for this employer in 2022. Rick Shank has had multiple promotions from inspector to detective to here we are now, superintendent. Decades later, in February of 2001, Toronto's police board approved Shank's promotion to a superintendent. He was assigned by the chief to lead professional standards. The appointment was at the midst of a stay-at-home order during the pandemic, and the board meetings was conducted over Zoom. A video recording of the motion shows no discussion before the vote. People were saying things like, "Looking at the appointment today, the promotion sends the wrong message," said former Mayor John Sewell. The bigwigs at the Toronto Police all said, "This is perfectly fine." I think what it means is that this is a real demonstration of police culture, where it's ingrained in police, the violence, discrimination against racialized people. It's not a big problem, he said. The promotion did meet eligibility requirements and internal references, said a Toronto Police spokesman, adding that they have been clear in their commitment to confront anti-black racism and over the past several years have been working harder than ever to promote equitable and fair non-discriminatory policing. Now, I have a quote from a lawyer named James Lowry. James Lowry, a Winnipeg-based lawyer who spent 33 years as a Toronto police officer, says, "Often police embellish their stories because they don't have enough to stop someone or because they need to cover up their own bad behavior." He says that it is common for Toronto police officers to rewrite their memo books to remove damaging information or to ensure officers' stories match with one another. It's called scripting. They script their books and they script their notes, said Lowry. You would do a rewrite about what supposedly happened as opposed to what really happened. So what do we have here? An alleged crooked cop now in charge of the professional standards of that very police force? No matter how much outcry from the community, the position still stands. In a city of scandal, with the mayor in affairs and the homelessness and economy in a shambles, is this a surprise to us? I'll let you decide in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe and let us know who you want to see next on Real Toronto Stories. Peace.